Welcome to Unified Champion Spotlight. My name is Craig Tornquist, and I have the distinct honor of interviewing the stars of the inclusion revolution. And I could not be more pleased to have these three leaders assembled together here today to talk to, because all of them played a major role in the formation of Champions Together, which is this incredible partnership between the Indiana High School Athletic Association and Special Olympics Indiana. And it's changed thousands of lives in this state, including my own. We have quite a lineup here today, including, and in no particular order, the recently retired commissioner of the Indiana High School Athletic Association, Bobby Cox, the not as recently but still retired president and CEO of Special Olympics Indiana, Mike Furnish, and batting cleanup, the original and still director of Champions Together, Mr. Lee Lonzo. Gentlemen, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for agreeing to be here today with me. I've got questions for each of you, and you may have questions for each other, so don't be afraid to jump in if someone else says sparks a memory. But Mike, I'd like to begin with you. Can you define what unified sports are and how they're different from traditional Special Olympic sports?
Unified sports is the Special Olympics version of competition in athletics, where the teams, individuals competing, is a mixture of individuals with and without disabilities. Special Olympics throughout its history until 1989 featured sports just for people with intellectual disabilities. And toward the end of the 80s, we realized that to stay relevant and to offer the kinds of opportunities and challenges our athletes deserved, we needed to become more community-based and need to be more inclusive in terms of who had a chance to experience the joy of Special Olympics.
So when did you first personally discover unified sports, and what was your initial involvement with it? Long before the partnership, you were kind of intrigued by this concept.
It was an opportunity presented to me while I was a volunteer in Special Olympics in 1988. The director of programs in Special Olympics Massachusetts developed the idea, and they immediately put out a request for a field test, people that would be interested in trying this wackadoo idea. And we here in Indiana were one of the first ones with our hands up, and we pilot tested unified sports basketball in November and December of 1988.
Now, when you piloted this took you further than just Indiana. Did this take you around the world?
It eventually led that direction, indeed. The test here was so successful that, keeping in mind now, this was the type of program Special Olympics was considering, but certainly hadn't decided on. And as they looked for a program that produced the kinds of results they expected for Special Olympics athletes, the Indiana program captured the attention of Mrs. Eunice Kennedy Shriver and her team in Washington, D.C. And before it was all over, after working on the organizing committee for the first decade, yes, I had chances to travel literally all over the world to talk about the dynamics of such a program.
And what turned you on about unified sports? Was there something where you thought, this is something that is really intriguing? Because obviously it lit a spark within you, but talk about that.
It was I'd like to give you a really sexy story about the inspiration.
Excellent.
But the truth of the matter is, we received this request for proposal. It was 1 page in length, very straightforward, and it said, would you be interested in testing a concept where people with and without disabilities played sports on the same team? And I thought back to my start with Special Olympics, 1973. They asked if I'd volunteer to be a basketball coach. They rolled a basketball out into the gym, and the first thing we did, we got the volunteers and the athletes and said, let's pick teams and play. It took almost no time for that experience to change my life. And when the thought of making this an official program, the thought about it carrying a worldwide organization with it, it made it easy for me to want to be part of that and to be a leader in that.
Okay, so you kind of got this. You kind of got the bug now. You've been doing unified sports. You've been talking about it. You're obviously a proponent of it. Bobby, your journey. I've heard you talk about. You all had been thinking for a while about servant leadership, this concept, and I've heard you talk about the luncheon that you attended on a regular basis for a service club in downtown Indianapolis, and the kind of the epiphany you had one day, either there or on the way back. Take us to that moment, because that kind of is where the journey towards unified sports in a very ambiguous way started for you.
Well, yeah, Craig, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. It's always fun to talk about these memories and things. But yeah, so I'm a member of the Indianapolis Downtown Kiwanis, and I like to call myself a backsliding Kiwanian. I mean, I don't go to all the meetings, but when I go to a meeting, I kind of pay attention. And so we were in the meeting, and we were having the necrology report, and they were talking about all the people in the club that had passed away. Billy died, and Joe died, and Susie died, and that went on for about 15 minutes. And then we got onto some more parts of the agenda, and then we started talking about the membership report. And that lasted about 30 seconds. Well, John here, he just joined. Welcome, John. So I'm driving back up to the north side of Indianapolis to the office, and, I'm one of those guys that made the top half of the class possible, but I could figure this one out, that if we don't start doing a better job of getting people to volunteer their services and give back to their community, we're going to run out of service clubs. There's not going to be any of them left because they're all going to die. There's not going to be anybody left. And I started thinking about the cause of that. And the cause of that was that adults. We're not teaching young people servant leadership. We're not doing a good job of teaching people to give back to their communities, to be a part of the community. You're not going to get paid for it, and you're not going to get a sticker for it or anything like that. You just do it. And so I turned to our Student Advisory Council, which is 18 of the best and brightest kids in Indiana. And I started talking to them about all the things they get from their school. You get to wear a uniform. You get coaching. You get a great facility. You get transportation. Every once in a while they feed you. And that uniform, many times, has got the name of your community across it. And I asked them, I said, what are you giving back to your school? And they looked at me like I was from Mars. They didn't understand the question. I said, it's not always about getting something. You have to give back. And I said, I want you to go out and find an organization that's in every one of our 92 counties that you can create a partnership with to develop some work together to give back. And they selected Special Olympics in Indiana, and that's how the partnership started in 2012. It started with kids.
And Lee, at the time, you were working with the Student Advisory Council. And for those who don't know Lee's background, I do. He is a legend in education here in Indiana. And prior to your involvement with Champions Together, well, Champions Together didn't exist at the time. You had a great history at Carmel High School, assistant principal, coach, athletic director, and one of your expertises, and I've seen this firsthand, is you are great at developing young student leaders. So you're with the SAC. The SAC now has this charge. Talk about your philosophy about student leadership and how effective they are when making a presentation to, say, someone like the IHSAA board about this idea they have.
Well, Craig, it's just been my experience that when you're dealing with really great high school kids, which the Student Advisory Council is, and you set a high goal for them, they measure up. So we started talking about what this might look like, but you have to empower them. You can't be the adults telling them what to do. And Bobby made a great charge. He didn't tell them what to do. He just said, go out and figure it out. So I helped guide that a little bit because I was familiar with the model that the NCAA was using, where they have student athlete advisory councils for each division, and they had partnered with various not-for-profits. And I said, why don't you look at this model and decide a few to look at? And they did. And I'd kind of like to hear from Mike. what his reaction was when some 17-year-old kid calls you as the CEO of Special Olympics Indiana and says, "How'd you like to send a delegation over on Sunday afternoon to make a presentation to us because we're going to judge you"?
It was maybe the quickest yes I ever said. And it was, it felt to me like a door opening that we had a successful program. We were operating nicely outside the partnership with the IHSAA. But when you heard the young people that were engaged by Bobby and Lee at the very beginning of this program and saw their sincerity about trying to make the world a better place, it is the kind of thing I felt highly comfortable facilitating and promoting as much as I could.
Was that an hour-long meeting? How long did your audition last?
I was in the room, so let me answer that one, Mike. They had two groups, and they offered each one a half-an-hour presentation after talking through the whole thing. And quite frankly, the other presentation was pretty strong, and I thought the kids might actually go that direction, but they had been empowered. It was going to be their choice, and within about 5 minutes, it was unanimous. We want to go with Special Olympics.
Do you remember, well, Bobby, when they came back to you, why did they want to go with Special Olympics? What was the hook for them, or
Well, I felt
what
like they
convinced them?
thought that I thought that the fact that Special Olympics is in all 92 counties really resonated with the kids. I wanted this to be something that wasn't a central Indiana-based, IHSA, every classification of schools. And because of that, I wanted this to be a more broad-based thing. And I think that idea rang true with those kids. And so as they were making their determinations, it became evident that Special Olympics was a better choice for them.
So, so they had to make a presentation then to the board, is that right, at the IHSAA? Because just because they wanted it didn't mean that this was going to happen. Either any of you talk about that, because Mike, I don't think you were in the room for the IHSAA presentation. Lee or Bobby, what was that like? I mean, these students have now got to go in front of this jury of athletic directors, or is it principals from around the state?
It's a mixture.
Okay.
It's a mixture. Let me do that one, Craig. They first had to come back to me. And so I met with the officers of the SAC, and they presented their idea to me, what they wanted to do, and how they felt the interview went, and how they foresaw this coming out. And I said, I think it's great, but you're going to have to convince the board. And so we put them on the agenda for the next meeting of the executive committee, and they made their presentation similar to what they did to me, and it was a slam dunk. I don't think there was one board member that couldn't raise their paddle quick enough to vote it in. And one of the things that we talked about as well as we started rolling this thing out, and I think it's important to bring in here, and we talked about this with our board, is that these principals and athletic directors in these schools, they are looking for ways to change the culture in their school. We talk a lot about bullying and misbehaving and kids not treating each other with respect. And this was an opportunity to do something that was totally different, where we could be inclusive of all kids, and it would change the culture in the school. That fact resonated with those principals and ADs because they're under pressure to change what's going on in their school. They're getting graded. And part of that is, what's the culture in your school? What's your absentee rate? What's your discipline rate? All those kinds of things. And if they can reduce those negative factors by having an inclusive environment, they gain as well. So it was a win-win for everybody. And I think that the kids, when they made their presentation to our board, I think it's something struck in their mind like, hey, this is really something good here. We can use this.
So you got Lee working with these students, and clearly they're getting some good advice and they're having some success. Mike, was it your idea? There needed to be a bridge between the two. Are you the one that thought that Lee would be a good person to be the bridge between the two organizations?
I was lucky enough, having grown up as a high school official to have crossed paths with Mr. Lonzo on a few occasions. And when he made his way into our office, it was, again, the door opening at the right time with the right person. So I knew we would be in good hands in terms of someone who could interpret to us what it meant to be part of the IHSAA. And then consequently, as Lee kind of went into a learning curve with us, he demonstrated right away how interested he was in understanding our world and making sure that translated as well.
So, Lee, how much did you know about Special Olympics when all of a sudden this partnership was formed and people are starting to look at you as, hey, we're used to listening to you. What can you tell us about this? What did you know about Special Olympics?
I could spell it. Literally, that's what I knew about it. As a matter of fact, I can go further than that. I spent 34 years as a high school educator, and I had very little experience with special education, kids with intellectual disabilities. I mean, that's just not that had never been my role. And Mike will tell you, my learning curve was steep. I needed to learn about the organization, how it was very different than I first anticipated, with states actually being autonomous to a certain degree from the national organization. With the local organizations, I had to meet these people and find out what they were about. And there was a lot to learn about philosophy that Mike taught me. It's not a pity thing. It's never been a pity thing. It's been about doing the best you can possibly do. So I learned to keep my mouth shut and go back to Mike, and before I said anything, say, "Is this right?" Because I know I walked into his office more than a few times, all excited because I'd seen something. He'd roll his eyes and say, "No, that's not right."
Well, Lee, you told me about a meeting you had where you were charged with developing some plan, and you really didn't have a vision for this thing, and you asked Mike a question that you said just kind of unlocked the door, and all of a sudden the vision was there, and it had been in his head all along. But set him up, and then I want to see if he remembers some of the things that that you do about that.
Well, I need to backtrack a little bit and say when I walked into Mike's office, my role was chauffeur. All I was doing was driving the president and the vice president of the organization over to a meeting at his office. I sat in the back of the room. I let the kids talk, and I left. You know, that was my role. And before long, Mike invited me back and said, as he said, it was kind of right time. He had some grant money. He asked me if I'd take this on. So all that was there. But then I had to come back and say, okay, couple of things, Mike. If we're going to do this, I want it to be the best in the country. Well, he was totally behind that. And I said, and right now, I don't even know what it looks like. And I had a hard time understanding his vision until the question I asked him, and I don't know if he remembers. I said, I know now you got a 50-year anniversary coming up soon. There'll no doubt be a banquet or some sort of celebration. What are you going to say 6 years from now? And that's how far we were away. What are you going to say 6 years ago about where we've been for the last 6 years? And he started pouring out ideas, and I just started writing as fast as I could.
Mike, do you remember at that point kind of what the dream was, the components of it?
I do. It was Lee asked the right question, and I think I gave the right answer. We envisioned opportunities for Special Olympics athletes to become a real part of their school. The question of whether it's serious, whether we play by the rules, whether we have real officials, whether there's real games, whether we keep score, those weren't questions for me. If we were going to do it, it had to have that kind of body. And I'm lucky for me, Lee was a good note taker, but even more so was able to interpret that vision then into kind of the real steps that would be required to take us from two organizations and large groups of people who have never interacted to, really a partnership in a very short period of time.
I remember one of the moments that I had with you, Mike, was at the Indiana High School Athletic Association Student Leadership Conference, which this same group of very talented student leaders puts on a wonderful leadership conference every year. And we did our first assembly. We've done 200 of them now around the state, but it was the very first one. And I asked you afterwards, what are you thinking? And you said, I feel like I'm sitting on top of a mountain of dynamite, and this thing is about ready to explode, and I have no idea which direction it's going to go in. And it seems to me that one of the most important pieces of the puzzle was unified track. You had to start somewhere with an actual unified sport. And Bobby, talk about that. Adding a sport for the IHSAA is not something that happens on a regular basis. So talk about that uphill climb and kind of how that played out and how it became, to happen.
Well, I think we need to go back before we got started with Unified Track. And Lee and I, along with Jeff Moeller, we went to a conference in Phoenix about unified sports. And quite frankly, I didn't know anything about unified sports. I knew the term, but I'd never seen it done. I didn't know anything about it. So we spent a couple days out there with folks that had already engaged in the program around the country. And as we left the conference, I turned to Lee and I said, we got to do this in Indiana. We need to take this to our board. Now, the last time we added a sport at the IHSA was in soccer in 1993. So it'd been, a long time before we'd added a sport. And our rules provide that you have to have 50% of the membership playing the sport at the same time to do it. Well, we kind of bent that rule. And I just kind of told them, we're going to do this. We're going to have a unified track program. And we opened it up and let any school in the state that wanted to have a unified team come together. We're going to have a tournament series. And we did that. We had 13 schools the very first year. And we felt that was a really good start. And as you referred to what Mike was referring to, sitting on that mountain of dynamite, once that happened, the next year we tripled the number. And then it just took off from there. People started seeing the value of kids with and without intellectual disabilities participating together. And things that we touched on earlier. This is an athletic sport. This isn't a pity party. These are kids that are competing at the highest level they can. And we've been able to devise a scoring system and a methodology that allows these kids to compete together. So it's true competition. The IHSA treats unified sports just like the other 20 sports. There's a tournament series. There are rules. There are bylaws. There's a trophy at the end. There are medals. It's treated exactly like the track and field championship. Matter of fact, it's run during the track and field championship. So we've made every effort to make sure that these sports are true IHSA sports. They have the title of unified sports to indicate that these are students with and without intellectual disabilities that participate together. But that was the beginning in 2013. And so it's hard to believe that it's been 7 years since that started. But it's alive and well and thriving and growing every year.
You've been to a lot of state championships. What are your memories from the first Unified Track State Championship? How was it different than other ones you'd attended?
Well, I've always said that every parent of a regular education student should be forced to go to a unified event. And when they see the joy that is emitted from kids and parents of these student athletes, there would never be any more issues in athletics. The thing that resonated with me, Craig, was the pure joy of competition. And I've shared this story before. There was a young lady from East Noble High School. Her name was Destiny. And they put her in the 400-meter dash. And this is the very first state track meet, 13 schools that were in the tournament. And this young lady was in the 5th and final section of the 400. It took her 3 minutes to run the 400, but she never stopped. She never walked, but it took her 3 minutes. And I'm going to tell you, when she came down that straightaway, this is getting toward the end of the meet, and the patrons were coming in for the state track meet. There wasn't a dry eye in that stadium. And the fact that that young lady finished that race to a standing ovation, I don't know that I've ever seen a sporting event more rewarding to me and just the true purpose of why we do what we do than that race right there. And I'll never forget that as long as I live.
Mike, how about you? What are your memories from that first state championship? And because you've been to a whole lot of festive sporting events through Special Olympics, how was that one different than some of the other things that you had witnessed?
Well, what I'll have to say makes perfect sense in comparison with what Bobby just said, because I left the track meet overwhelmed watching the regular ed kids be teammates and how effective these young people, 18 years old, 16 years old, were at dealing with folks who had some real challenges. And I gained a new sense of appreciation, and maybe more so a sense of hope that we have a generation of young people now who have been given that leadership opportunity and are really doing the best with it. I felt better for the future of our teammates, those Special Olympics athletes who are now on the team. I felt better for them because they weren't being talked down to, and they weren't being either placated or neglected. They were teammates, and that was the part for me. I enjoyed Destiny's run, but I loved the way the teammates came up big in the big event.
That's great. Lee, so Unified Track kicked the door open. Can you kind of talk about all the opportunities, the sports that have evolved since then? Can you give us a quick rundown of what's happened since that first state championship?
Sure. Well, we kind of developed a plan. I think with both these guys, we were always looking out in the future and how can we get better? What's next? And we came up with a plan where eventually we would have 6 sports that were unified, 3 run by Special Olympics Indiana and 3 run by the IHSA. And we were really kind of looking for the IHSA to host what I would call traditional sports that they were already involved with in some way, shape, or form, just not unified. And the Special Olympics would fill in the gaps with sports that sometimes are a little bit more appropriate for kids who not only have intellectual disabilities, but also have physical disabilities. So a student in high school would have 2 options every sports season, and they, just like every other general education student, would be able to be involved in athletics all year long. So the next thing we added was bocce. If you're not familiar with that, that's a lawn bowling type game, and students in wheelchairs can participate and be full members of it. So that was our next sport, and we offered that in the fall, but that was a Special Olympics sport. Then we added bowling, also a Special Olympics sport that's really popular, and I think could exceed even in what we're doing in track and field before long. And then a couple of years ago, something that has just been extremely popular is unified flag football, and that's run through the IHSA. So we now have 4 sports. We're still looking to add 2 over the next few years, but we're growing so much in the 4 we have right now that it's right now we're kind of settling in. But as you said, it's not just thousands over 7 years; it's up to thousands a year now are being introduced to Special Olympics unified sports theory, either through Special Olympics Indiana or the IHSA.
Well, how many high schools? Because you said, I think, 13 in the original unified track season. How many high schools have done something with unified sports now since this began?
Nearly half, and I know that was kind of a tipping point for Mike when he said let's shoot for the fact that we'd have at least half the schools by 5 or 6 years from now, with the eventual goal being every one of them. Well, there are challenges for some of the schools. We've had to get creative because you take a look at our private schools, parochial schools, they don't have students in their building who have intellectual disabilities. And we also have a lot of really small rural schools that don't have very many kids. They belong usually to what we call co-ops. So we've had to get creative and trying to find new ways to get them all involved. But yeah, we've got well over 200 now that have been involved, not only in one of those sports, but now they're popping up with their own sports. There's basketball at Is Indiana being run unofficially without a tournament all over the state. So they're having a lot of fun with it.
Mike, how has this partnership, which is still going stronger than ever, how has it changed Special Olympics Indiana? How is working with the IHSAA in this way as an equal partner, how has it changed that organization?
It it may sound like an overstatement, but I think it's giving us a future. The Special Olympics here in Indiana is a big organization. We have now over 16,000 athletes that compete and literally thousands of volunteers that dedicate hours upon hours to make that happen. But it had become what I might call a generational program, that kids who grew up in Special Olympics who are my age are still my age. And the ability to recruit and successfully engage younger kids has become a challenge. We today, I think, look at schools as an area that really adds body and really adds hope to the Special Olympics program going forward. And it's going to take a while, I'm sure, just as it will with the IHSAA, to fully understand and embrace the possibilities. But we now think of those teams that are running track and playing unified flag football. Those are our teams. We're cheering for them the same way we have any Special Olympics teams.
Well, not just athletes, but volunteers too. I mean, these are your future coaches and partners and funders. I mean, and employers. I've heard Jeff Moeller now talk a lot. I mean, almost every time he speaks, he talks about, this is great. You guys are partners and you're having a wonderful time out there on the playing field. But when you're in a position to hire employees, are you going to consider the partners and the athletes that you're working with right now as potential employees and coworkers?
Something I'd say, Craig, that may be a little too philosophical for the Unified Champion spotlight, but I'm going to say it anyway. The thing that the startup of this program has shown me, or has reinforced with me, is how long it takes change to happen. The program was embraced quickly by a large number of people, but that notion of growing together, the developing the connections to realizing the possibilities for these young people to maybe point a career toward work with people with disadvantages. These are all things that's the hard work, and that's the time that we're in now, is learning how not to just enjoy a moment, but to understand how this has a long-term impact that could be beyond belief.
Bobby, how has the partnership changed the IHSAA?
Well, I think the membership has a different attitude about students with intellectual disabilities, first and foremost. And as we attempted to sell this, if you will, to our membership, it truly has demonstrated that for those schools that embrace this activity, it is changing the culture in their school. It's making their school a better place to be. And I think as we continue to move forward and all the challenges we have right now in our society, whether we're talking about COVID or we're talking about social injustice or whatever it might be, I think that by engaging in this program, those schools have a different, and I would say a more healthy perspective of inclusion and working with other people with different backgrounds and different ability levels and different aspirations and goals. And I think that makes the school a better place to be. And I'm reading a book right now. It's called A Time to Build. And it's about recreating institutions in our country. And this is one of the things I think our school communities, we need to continue to recreate what the school community looks like. And I think this partnership is a cornerstone in our state, and I hope across our country, in rebuilding these institutions where people can come together and be inclusive and have respect for everyone, regardless of their intellectual ability and regardless of their background, that they are human beings and they are contributing members of the community. And I really believe that this program is going to be the launching pad for that attitude moving forward, particularly with the change in the challenges we're seeing right now.
Another moment I had with you, Mike, was at the third Unified Track State Championship, and we were standing by the track in activity all around us, and 4 students walked by us, 2 athletes, 2 partners, and you had this faraway look in your eye, and I said, what are you thinking? He said, that's it. That is right there. That is what has changed. He said, the first year we did this, no one knew what anyone was doing. I mean, no one knew what we were doing. We were just doing something. He said, this is year number 3. And he said, those 4 are now just friends. That's it. He said, that's what has changed. These are just friends hanging out and enjoying each other's company. Very cool. Lee, these 2 gentlemen are retired. You are not. So since you're still on the clock, I want to know, I'm going to ask you the question you asked Mike. 5 years from now, where do you see this partnership, and what's kind of your vision for the next few years of Champions Together?
Well, everything's changed in the last 9 months for sure. And my biggest goal right now is to make sure that we don't lose anything that we've gotten. So I'm working really hard to try to make it as easy as possible for schools to stay involved. They've got so many things going on, trying to get school back up and running, not to mention the financial difficulties. So if we can get through this thing and get back to normal, my vision for 5 years from now is everything doubling. I mean, we have been on a path for 7 years of exponential growth. I hope Mike would agree that we did come up with a program that would make Indiana proud. We seem to be in high demand as speakers. Bobby and I have been around the country to say, here's how we did in Indiana. How can we help you? So I want to keep us on that path, and with the people in place right now, Jeff Moeller and Paul Neidig, I think we're there. Every year we get 9 new members to our 18-member student advisory committee. They're going to be great every year, and we've got so many people now. It has become, Unified Sports is just what they do. I've often said, if you do something in a school for 3 years, it's what we've always done. And now we've got schools that have been involved with Unified Sports for 7 years, and they're not going to go away any more than their football or basketball or cross country program is going to go away. So I think that would be my vision, something that I really look on as something I was proud to be a small part of.
Well, last question, and it's the same one for all 3 of you. I'm going to start with Mike on this. Mike, how has Champions Together impacted you personally? As you look back over your career, what is your takeaway from that chapter of your career?
It's a writer by the name of Studs Terkel wrote in a novel not so long ago that it's every man's biggest hope is to make a dent in the world. And I view, along with Lee and Bobby and all the people that have worked on this, a sense of satisfaction that we've made a dent. I can tell you that as a former IHSAA athlete, and we all get, as we age, I think we all develop a greater appreciation for what it means to have been an athlete, to have the coaches and the competition that we enjoyed when we were kids. And the dent, for me, I'm going to take it to think that there are now kids with intellectual disabilities who are going to grow up with that. They're going to grow up with a sense for what they've learned at that most important time in their life, and know that they share that with quite a community here in the state of Indiana.
Lee, how about you? What has this chapter meant to your rich career?
Well, as I said earlier, it was a totally different path for me that I never envisioned. But Mike and Bobby both put some confidence in me to empower the right people That would be the kids and the coaches and the athletic directors, and tell their story. And it's certainly, I have to say, like Mike, I am real proud to say that I helped make a dent that I think is going to be around forever. I really do. As long as the IHSA is around, as long as we have education-based athletics, I think we're going to have unified sports. So it makes me very happy.
And Bobby, your retirement date was very recently, so I'm sure you have been doing a whole lot of reflecting. Where does Champions Together fit in your story?
Well, Craig, I would tell you that when I took over for Commissioner Rest 9.5+ years ago now, as commissioner, one of the things that we talked about frequently during our transition was that the status quo is unacceptable. And as I was easing into the position in 2011, I started thinking about what are going to be some things that we can do with this organization to move it forward. How do we move the needle forward? What do we do to make this organization better? There are groups out there that can run tournaments all over this country. School sponsored, non-school sponsored, there's something every day of the week, every year. What are we going to do that's different? What are we going to do that's special? And as I look back on my career as commissioner, the partnership with Special Olympics, the development of our unified sports program, the enhancement of the lives of thousands of kids is the part that I'm most proud of. And I know that it's going to continue through the leadership of Paul and Jeff. I'm indebted to Mike and to Lee for their vision and their energy for what they've done with this. You know, I was just that backsliding Kiwanian that just came up to the kids and had to come up with an idea of something, and they ran with it. And I'm so proud of those kids. And, you know, one of the things you look back on is what do your former students do? And those kids that were in that initial group now are in law school, and they're out in the job world now and starting their families, and tremendously successful young people. And as I look back on how this all developed, that's the reward. That's the reward of being an educator, you know, to see how that's happened and to see that, and in my opinion, both our organizations, the IHSA and Special Olympics, are better, and our needles have both moved forward because of this partnership. That's what I'm proud of.
Well, thousands of people have been involved with this movement, and now it's thousands every year. But I would argue that it would not be nearly as strong as it is without you three guys. And I have tremendous respect for all three of you. And this partnership has changed my career, and I am delighted to be on this journey with the three of you. And this has been very special having the three of you here together, and I appreciate you making time for us. And we hope a lot of people enjoy this for a long, long time. So Mike Furnish, Lee Lonzo, and Bobby Cox, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your friendship. And folks, you can count on seeing these guys if there's a unified track state championship next spring. It's going to take a lot to keep these three away from it. So, gentlemen, thank you, one and all, and I look forward to seeing you all in person, hopefully in the near future.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Craig.